Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Watercolor and I'm a botanical watercolor artist. So here in this channel I'm sharing all my watercolor paintings, the process, and a little bit of behind the scenes. So we recently painted this Amaryllis flower with my students on Patreon. That's where you can find a full step-by-step tutorial. But right now I'll quickly show you the process, the techniques, and the approach we took to paint it. Without further ado, let's get into it. And right now you can see me, I'm using a little bit of masking fluid to mask the stamen. It's gonna protect our paper until we're ready to paint it, and so it's gonna keep our paper clean and white, and red is not gonna go through that layer of masking fluid. So it's a very useful tool to have if you paint with watercolors. I don't use it very often, but if I do, it surely helps me. So let's mix up now 50 shades of red. You can see I'm using limited palette as always, and just slightly adjusting the quantity of each pigment, I will create necessary shades of red and gray and neutrals for this flower. Before we start, often I need an underlayer before I apply all our main layers. So underlayer is just something I want to shine through my main layer. So in this case, it would be that highlight, rim of highlight on each petal that looks a little bit of grayish red. So on the dry paper with wet pigment, I paint in that area so that when I apply my main layer with red, it will shine through. It's not something you must do before, it can also be done at the end. It's just the approach that I find leaves a smoother effect. So now that we've done that, we can go and apply our main layer. Now I will use wet on wet technique, means I apply clean water glaze on one of the petals. Try to create it as even as possible because color goes where the water is. And so once I have this very evenly glistening water glaze, I start applying my colors. So I carefully examine the petal and try to see which shade of red I need. So somewhere is a bit more yellowy and orangey color, somewhere I need very dark. And now you can see me painting around that rim of highlight that I want to leave out. And I want to leave slightly more exaggerated highlight than I can see on my reference, just because in reality the highlight was quite bright and shiny. It just doesn't transfer very well on printed image. So, and that's the approach I'm going to take to paint all the petals. And once I apply my main colors and the dark in the center, I can add a bit more color while the glaze is still damp. And once we fully paint all the petals, we'll start building a little bit more of the tonal values. Right, so now I said we're gonna do a little bit tonal values, but I realized that before I do that, I would like to apply my veins under that finishing layers, because even though the flower has really bright, strong veining, but it's somewhat a little bit diluted and smudged out and it's not as sharp. So in that case, I like to apply my veins, sandwich them in between the layers. So applying them now after my first layer of main color, so that then I can go and layer some additional colors and therefore to soften all that veining. So now I will kind of merge a couple of techniques So the glazing, where you usually build tonal values, but I also will use a dry brush, which I normally do at the very end, but it's just appropriate for this flower to kind of, for those two techniques, go hand in hand and just examine where I need to glaze and where I need to dry brush. And I work 2 petals at a time, finish them fully, and then move on to their next. So when I want a bigger area covered, I glaze over with wet pigment on dry paper. Where I want it to be a bit darker, more saturated, I then paint with slightly drier pigment. It just really depends on a little area. And then at the end, if I want to smooth something out, to smooth out the layer, or even to darken the darkest parts, I go with my small brush and I do a little bit of dry brush. Normally when you glaze or dry brush with slightly drier pigment, you get the darkest colors dark quicker, but you need to be careful to use very transparent watercolors. That's the most important rule probably I would have when you paint with watercolors, because if you pick up something very thick, it will not soak into the paper, it's gonna sit on top and you won't be able to layer and keep dry brushing and layering and glazing over and over again. So the beauty of watercolors is the luminosity you can create from multiple layers. So therefore you have to keep your colors very transparent. And when you want to dry brush, people often get confused. How can you dry brush with dry pigment but keep it watery? Well, you keep it watery and transparent, but then you take the water out by tapping your brush on a towel or paper towel and take that excess and you left with pigment, but it's very light rather than thick. So the flower is done. All we need to do is now remove that masking fluid from that stamen by rubbing with your clean finger or rubber, and we just go and paint with some light reds. And so that's it. That was our tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed and you would like to paint it with me, perhaps on my Patreon channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.